Walk through the mill districts of Manchester today. The old ones, near Coates and Ardwick, where the buildings that remain have been converted into apartments and creative studios and bars where young professionals drink cocktails in rooms that once held industrial looms. The chimneys are mostly gone. The ones that survived are listed structures now, preserved as monuments rather than tools, their brick columns rising into the damp northern sky with nothing to say anymore. If you look carefully at the curbstones in the oldest streets, you can sometimes still see the grooves worn by the wheels of carts that carried bales of cotton from the canal warehouses to the mill doors. These are the ghosts of the machine. And to understand what happened to it, you need to go back to when the machine was the most profitable industrial enterprise in human history. Not a factory, not a company, a system. A perpetual money machine that spanned 2 continents, consumed one and enriched the other, and ran with a cold, relentless efficiency that its architects understood as the natural order of the world. The machine had a perfect circle at its center. Raw cotton, grown in India on Indian land by Indian labor, was shipped to Lancashire. Lancashire mills running on Lancashire coal, using Lancashire workers and Lancashire capital, turned that raw cotton into finished textile. The finished textile was shipped back to India and sold in Indian markets at prices that Indian handloom weavers could not match, because the Industrial Revolution had given Lancashire productivity advantages that no human hand could replicate. The profits flowed to Manchester and London and the shareholders of the great textile houses. The raw material came from India. The finished goods went to India. The money stayed in England. This was not trade. It was extraction dressed as commerce. The human cost of this perfect circle was distributed with great precision across India's weaving communities. For centuries, the handloom weavers of Bengal and Dhaka and the textile regions of the subcontinent had been among the most skilled craftspeople in the world. Dhaka muslin, the fine cotton cloth produced in Bengal, was traded as far as Rome and Constantinople in the ancient world, and remained, at the height of Mughal India, a luxury commodity whose quality no European manufacturer could approach. The East India Company's trade records from the 17th and 18th centuries are full of the prices paid for Indian textiles that the European market could not produce for itself. Then the Industrial Revolution arrived, and the machine had no mercy for the craft. Lancashire mills could produce cotton cloth at a fraction of the cost of handloom production, in volumes that the handloom could never match, at a quality that was adequate for mass markets even if it could not touch the finest Indian work. The British government, which was the East India Company's ultimate authority, applied tariffs to Indian textiles entering Britain while opening Indian markets to British goods with minimal restriction. The playing field was not tilted, it was vertical. The weavers of Bengal and Dhaka found their markets disappearing, their income collapsed. Their communities, built around a craft that had sustained them for generations, faced an economic siphon that was pulling the life out of them 1 yard of underpaid cloth at a time. The mills stayed open in Lancashire. The grass grew in the cracks of the weaving districts of Bengal. The man who understood how to stop this machine was not a general or a politician in the conventional sense. Mohandas Gandhi had trained as a lawyer in London, had practiced in South Africa, and had spent 2 decades developing a theory of political action that started from a premise almost nobody else had articulated with the same clarity. The British Empire in India was not, at its foundation, a government. It was a commercial enterprise. Its primary purpose was economic extraction. Its political apparatus, the viceroy, the Indian civil service, the legal system, the military, was the enforcement mechanism of that commercial purpose. You could not defeat it by seizing political power, because political power was not what it was protecting. You had to seize the supply chain. Gandhi's diagnosis of the situation was forensically precise. The Indian economy was dependent on Britain in 2 directions simultaneously. It supplied raw materials, cotton, jute, indigo, other agricultural commodities, to British industry. And it consumed finished British goods, textiles above all, that its own craftspeople had been priced out of producing. Both directions of the dependency generated profit for the British system and poverty for the Indian one. To break the machine, you had to break both directions at once. You had to stop supplying the raw material, and you had to stop consuming the finished product. The spinning wheel, the charkha, was not chosen as a symbol of resistance because it was romantic or nostalgic. It was chosen because it was the most direct, most accessible, most universally understandable act of economic non-cooperation available to the largest possible number of Indians. Every person who spun their own thread and wove their own cloth was doing 3 things simultaneously. They were refusing to buy British textiles. They were refusing to supply the cotton that British mills needed. And they were demonstrating in the most tangible possible way that the dependency the British system had created was not a natural condition, but a political one that could be reversed by individual daily decision. The charkha was not a spinning wheel. It was a moral wall of refusal, built 1 revolution at a time. If nobody has ever explained to you that Gandhi's genius was not moral philosophy, but supply chain strategy, that the Salt March was not a protest, but a forensic attack on a revenue monopoly, subscribe now. Because the story of how a man in a loincloth made the most profitable empire in history insolvent by making it unprofitable is one of the most important strategic insights in the history of power. Stay with us. The Salt March of 1930 was the masterstroke. Salt seems, on the surface, an unlikely instrument of imperial undoing. But Gandhi had done the forensic analysis, and the analysis was devastating. The British salt monopoly, which made it illegal for Indians to produce or sell salt except through licensed British channels and taxed every grain sold, was the most visible and the most universally felt economic imposition in the entire colonial architecture. Every person in India, regardless of caste, religion, income, or location, needed salt. Every person in India was paying the British salt tax. The monopoly was not enormous in absolute terms as a fraction of imperial revenue, but as a symbol it was perfect. It was the system in miniature, a natural resource present on every Indian beach and every salt flat in the country, made artificially scarce and artificially expensive by a legal monopoly enforced on behalf of a foreign commercial enterprise. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi and 78 chosen followers left the Sabarmati ashram and walked. They walked for 24 days, covering approximately 240 miles to the coastal town of Dandi. Wherever they passed, people joined them. By the time Gandhi reached the sea and bent down to pick up a handful of salt from the beach, breaking the law with a gesture of ritual simplicity, tens of thousands of people were watching, and hundreds of thousands more across India were simultaneously doing the same thing. Making salt, breaking the monopoly, refusing the tax. The act was technically illegal. It was also economically precise. Every grain of salt produced outside the monopoly was a grain the British revenue system could not capture. Gandhi's visit to the Lancashire mill workers in 1931 is the episode in this story that complicates the simple nationalist narrative and makes it something more interesting. He went to Lancashire in the midst of the Indian textile boycott, the campaign that was directly costing the mill workers their livelihoods by reducing demand for the cloth they made. He went there knowing he would face crowds of people whose unemployment was connected to the strategy he had designed. He went anyway. The reception he received was not what most accounts of colonial resistance would predict. The Lancashire mill workers, many of them unemployed, met him with warmth and even with something approaching solidarity. They understood, some of them, that their position in the machine was not so different from the position of the Indian workers at the other end of it. They were both components of a system designed to generate profit for the shareholders and wages for those too dependent on the system to refuse it. Gandhi stood in the streets of Lancashire and made clear that his argument was not against the workers of Manchester. It was against the machine that required both Indian poverty and Lancashire dependency to function. The struggle was against the system, not the people the system had made into its instruments. The cost-benefit analysis that ultimately broke the empire's will in India was not conducted in a single dramatic moment. It was accumulated over decades of civil disobedience, boycotts, non-cooperation, and the systematic demonstration that the costs of maintaining the Indian political relationship were exceeding the economic returns. The Indian civil service required enormous expenditure to staff and maintain. The military presence required to suppress periodic unrest was expensive. The diplomatic costs of governing a population of 300 million people who had, through the independence movement, developed a coherent and articulate case against their own governance were rising. The revenue that the empire extracted from India had to be set against the cost of the extraction. When Gandhi made the extraction expensive enough, the return on investment turned negative. Indian independence came in August 1947. The formal accounting of what the empire had cost and what it had returned was never conducted in the terms Gandhi would have specified. And the decolonization process was messy and in many respects incomplete. But the fundamental transformation was real. The machine had stopped. The mills of Lancashire did not immediately close. That process took the following 2 decades, as global competition from other low-cost producers finished what the Indian boycott had started. But the perfect circle was broken. Indian cotton no longer flowed automatically to Lancashire. Indian markets no longer absorbed British cloth automatically. The supply chain had been seized imperfectly and gradually, but definitively. The genius of what Gandhi constructed was that it operated at a level of strategic sophistication that his opponents consistently underestimated because they were looking for the wrong kind of power. They were looking for armies, for political parties, for the conventional instruments of challenge to imperial authority. What they faced instead was a movement that had decided to make the empire insolvent by making its business model fail. Every homespun garment was a unit of revenue denied. Every grain of illegally harvested salt was a tax uncollected. Every act of non-cooperation was a cost imposed on a system whose profitability depended on the cooperation of the people it governed. The weapon was the wallet. The battlefield was the supply chain. And the strategy was to make empire unprofitable before making it impossible. The economy is a human creation. It was built by human decisions, sustained by human habits, and can be dismantled by human refusal. The British Empire in India was not a force of nature. It was a commercial enterprise that required Indian participation to function. When enough Indians decided to withdraw that participation, not all at once, not in a single dramatic act, but persistently, daily, in the accumulated weight of millions of individual decisions to spin their own thread and harvest their own salt, the enterprise became insolvent. The spinning wheel was not a symbol of the past. It was a testament to the most subversive insight in the history of power, that the wallet is a weapon, and that the most durable revolutions are the ones conducted not in the streets, but in the supply chain. History is not over, it is underwritten.